Hello, everyone. Today, I'm absolutely honored to be joined by Star Wars Fan Animations. All his channel, his socials, all that will be linked in the description, of course. He is behind the recent Shadows of the Empire fan film trailer that's been gaining traction on YouTube. Very exciting times for us, so very honored to have him on the show today. And just really excited to talk about how he got into the Star Wars expanded universe and then talk a bit about the fan films as well. Thank you so much for coming on today, man. How are you?
I'm doing very good, thank you.
I'm really, really excited to have you on today because I think that it's my opinion and several other people's in the fandom that, the way to keep the EU alive is probably through these fan films. So we're very appreciative for the work that you're doing. So very excited to talk with you today.
I'm very excited as well.
So to start off, how did you get into Star Wars? Well, where was your starting point?
So, my earliest experience with Star Wars is only one that I've been told because I was too young to actually remember it. But I was in a movie theater when The Phantom Menace came out. And this was, pre-memory Star Wars fan animations. But I was told that I was in there in 99, and ever since then, I really wanted Star Wars toys, Star Wars, cups, and eating utensils, and Star Wars cereals, like you name it. And then of course I watched Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith in theaters. I definitely have a very vivid memory of seeing Revenge of the Sith in theaters. Actually, funny story on that. I did not know that in movies when characters die, that is just an actor pretending to die. And because there's so many people that died in Revenge of the Sith, I thought every single actor just signed a contract saying the money will go to my family. I want to do this for the movie. And they just offed themselves on camera.
Really method actors.
Yes. And I remember for months, I thought that when people died in movies, unless it was a cartoon, that an actual actor just decided, like, I'm going to die for this movie. That's how much I want to be a part of it. And so that was pretty funny. I remember I told one of my friends that, and they were like, are you stupid? Like, no, that's not how it works. And they kind of explained it to me, how a lot of that stuff is made. And then shortly after that, my parents bought a box set of the prequel DVDs. And I just remember being like elementary school age, just like binge watching through all the behind the scenes, on those particular discs, there's probably 10 plus hours of stuff on there. And I watched all of it and I was like, okay, now I know people don't die. They just pretend. They don't actually go into lava and set themselves on fire. It's all makeup and effects. And yeah, and definitely throughout those, years that the prequels were coming out, I remember, I think the first expanded universe books I actually read were the Young Boba Fett books by, I think, Terry Bison or Bisson. I don't know exactly how it's pronounced, but I remember reading those completely out of order. And then same with the Jedi Quest and Jedi Apprentice books. My school's library had all of those. And I just would pick one with a cool cover and read it. So it's been a while since I've gone back and read any of those. I, of course, have repurchased physical copies for myself now, but I haven't read those since I was a little kid. But I remember reading them all out of order, and I'd be very confused because I was like, oh, wait, this one took place before this one. So I read these out of order, and I tried to get the numberings down, but yeah. So
you kind of just grew up with the prequel trilogy. What was your first exposure to the original trilogy, to that there was kind of more Star Wars there? Because it sounds like this was a lot of like going to see the prequels in theaters, prequel related novels and stuff in your library. So when did you become aware that the original trilogy was there? And how does it stack up to the prequel trilogy? Like maybe as a kid you liked one over the other, but maybe as an adult that's changed. Where do you come out on that?
I remember watching the original trilogy kind of like just regularly because we had a box set of DVDs growing up. And I remember, like I said, I don't remember watching The Phantom Menace, and I I don't know if I really remember seeing Attack of the Clones in theaters. I still might have been kind of like in that nebulous area where you don't remember things, but I do remember watching like just on DVD the original trilogy, and then I remember very vividly seeing Revenge of the Sith, and then just rewatching all 6 of them on DVD pretty regularly throughout my childhood. And so, yeah, I definitely thought that the prequels were kind of like cooler in a certain sense, mainly just because of like the energy of all the space battles, of all the hand-to-hand battles, lightsaber battles, all that stuff was definitely a lot higher in energy. But for whatever reason, well, actually, I know the reasons because they're really great movies, but I really loved watching the original trilogy because I just felt it a lot more than I did watching the prequels. But of course, to this day, I love all 6 and appreciate them all for everything that they are.
If you had to point to a favorite Star Wars movie, where would you go?
Probably Revenge of the Sith. It's just it's the most Star Wars movie in that sense, and it really ties into everything. I mean, it culminates things that were started in Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones, and it really points to A New Hope, Empire Strikes Back, and Return of the Jedi.
It's a good bridge kind of between them. Yeah. So you alluded to the fact that you were aware of the Star Wars Expanded Universe fairly early on, but perhaps before you were aware that there was this thing that was branded as the Expanded Universe, you were just aware of these young readers' novels in libraries. So what was your further exposure to Star Wars that led to you kind of uncovering this expanded universe that's a part of the movies, obviously, but kind of its separate branch of Star Wars?
So I remember my favorite video game, probably of all time, but definitely Star Wars video game, is Bounty Hunter, and that's one of the few that I had as a kid. I played through most of them now as an adult, but definitely when I was younger, I played Bounty Hunter probably 3 times a year from start to finish. And it's just such a fun game because you got to be a bounty hunter, and even outside of the main story, you could just go wander around the maps and just catch people with bounties on their head, right?
Yeah.
And so it wasn't an open world game like a lot of new stuff is, but you kind of had that feeling early on, and the cinematics quality in there is probably one of the best video game cinematics quality that video games had at that time. And it was really odd to me because none of my friends had it. And a lot of them had Battlefront and Battlefront 2, the classic ones, and a lot of them had Lego Star Wars, which I had that too as well. But most of them played a lot of that stuff. The Clone Wars game, the one with the what is it? It's got Ulic Qel-Droma in it, and it's about
Clone Wars 2002, Mace Windu's in it, Gunship. Yeah.
And see, what was one of the other big ones at the time? Trying to remember what it was. A lot of the X-Wing games were kind of out at that time too, but almost none of my friends had Bounty Hunter, but I had it, and I was like, this is a really special thing. And actually, I think it's issue 2, but all of issue 2 of the Open Seasons comics were a part of the game. You could unlock them if you got a hidden thing on each level. You could unlock pages from the comic. I remember reading all that, and I was like, I got to read the comic. And I remember begging my mom to buy it for me, but she just wouldn't buy me the comic for that. But at our library, in our kids section, they had a bunch of Star Wars comics. And so I remember just ripping through the rest of Open Seasons there. And then I discovered the Knights of the Old Republic comics and the Legacy comics, which were absolutely confusing to me as a kid because for whatever reason, I just completely glossed over the fact that KOTOR comics were almost 4,000 years in the past, and the Legacy comics were 120, 30 years in the future.
Yeah.
But I really liked reading all of those, even though like I said before, I read a lot of stuff out of order as a kid. So, I would just read whatever was there. And, as a little kid, I'd be like, this one's got Talon on the cover. I think I'm gonna pick up that one, read that, see what's in there. But I remember reading those as a kid and really enjoying them as well. And I remember one of my dad's friends bought him a copy of Cloak of Deception for his birthday one year. I still to this day do not think my dad has read it. And And he later told me I could take it with me whenever I moved out. So I have that copy still now. But I remember reading that kind of, maybe not as a kid, but like kind of, preteen, middle school age kind of time. But I remember reading through that and really liking it. And then I remember playing SWOTOR and KOTOR as well. Like I just kind of found my way into a lot of different things. And I didn't even really see like any kind of timelines or like collection type things. Like I just saw what was there, whether it would be in my library or, stuff that my parents got me or stuff at like GameStop or whatever. I would just see things and be like, that looks cool. Let me check it out. And then, of course, like whenever the Old Republic cinematics came out, I was like, I got to play this game because those cinematics were really cool. And let me think. I remember I was probably in high school by this time, but I remember reading the Darth Bane trilogy and Darth Plagueis. I got those pretty much as soon as I heard about them because I was like, wait a second, there's, Darth Bane and Darth Plagueis, like who are these guys? And of course, those books are incredibly well written and love all four of them. And I think around after I finished those ones, I was like, I got to get more. So I went and got all the other Old Republic books that were out at the time. So Annihilation, Fatal Alliance, and Deceived.
Yep.
That's what it's called. So I read all those as well. And like I said, I read a lot of stuff very much so out of order. I just kind of saw a cool thing, read cool thing, or if it was a video game, played cool thing. And that's kind of what I did pretty much up until the Disney merger, and that's where a few things started to change.
Indeed. And so it just sort of sounds like you gradually kind of peered into all these different corners of the Star Wars universe, wherever you could get your hands on something. It just led you into various pockets of the expanded universe. But as you alluded to, kind of this Disney buyout shook things up quite a bit. So was it at this point that you learned like what the expanded universe was, and that some of it was now no longer going to be canon, that they were moving away from that? What was that like?
Yeah, so April 25th, 2014. I don't know if I heard about it that specific day, but it was like that week that I just saw online that because I knew Disney had bought Star Wars in 2012, but they just hadn't really announced anything for a year and a half until April 25th. And then whenever they announced that everything that had come before wasn't canon and everything moving forward was, I was like, wait a second. You're telling me I put, probably like thousands of hours at this point into this material, and y'all are just going to pretend like it didn't exist?
Yeah.
And I was probably a bit more optimistic than I should have been. Because in my mind, I was like, well, like, if they don't contradict it, then, I can just kind of hold two things at once. And I was like, Darth Bane trilogy, that's 1,000 years in the past. And, they hadn't announced that they had plans to do anything that far back. And same with any of the Old Republic stuff, and even Darth Plagueis to a certain extent. They really haven't, even to this day, published much that really contradicts a lot in there. Dooku Jedi Lost is probably the most significant one, because he actually leaves the Jedi Order decades before he does in Darth Plagueis in that book. But and so even probably all the way through 2017, I bought and read every single Disney canon book and comic. And so, and there were a few that I enjoyed and a few that I probably can't remember much of them. Like, I remember I really enjoyed Battlefront Twilight Company, but I couldn't tell you any of the characters' names today. And like Dark Disciple, for instance, whenever I first read that, I was like, okay, that's cool, new Clone Wars episodes. And then I read the Republic comics, and I was like, hold up, like, one of these things is like 10 times better than the other. And it, like, I immediately was like, wait a second. At first I blamed Christy Golden, but then I was like, wait, most of these ideas were Dave Filoni's. But I was like, hold up. So you took these like cool ideas from the Republic comics and just like remixed them in the worst way possible. And so, yeah, that was kind of a bit of a rude awakening for me when I started to realize, like, you know, whenever I would hear things like, oh, they're bringing Thrawn back into canon, or, ooh, did you know that in this one reference guide, Revan is canon now? It's like, oh, they brought it back into canon. But I think I kind of started to gradually lose hope. I was like, they're just bringing these things back into canon in name only. They're not bringing the stories back in. They're not, you know, and when they are bringing the stories back in, they're remixing them in ways that kind of undermine the original. And I started to gradually lose hope. And then after The Last Jedi came out, I was drinking some serious copium for a little bit. I was trying to convince myself, like, you know, this was okay, that it wasn't, you know, Luke Skywalker throwing the lightsaber and, you know, it's time for the Jedi to die and stuff like that. I tried for a while to convince myself that it was better than it was. And I remember after The Rise of Skywalker came out, for about 1 hour, I was like, okay, that was all right. And then as soon as I started to turn my brain on and think about it, I couldn't justify that movie. And then it was like everything else just started falling apart. I was like, you know, almost everything in The Force Awakens is, hey, look at what's coming next. And then everything in The Last Jedi was, hey, look what's coming next. And then the final thing was, we don't have anything original or interesting. And so, you know, it's kind of like, you know, built on a foundation of sand, and then you drop like a big giant lead ball on top, and then it all just kind of bottoms out. And so it was actually after The Rise of Skywalker that I read my first post Return of the Jedi expanded universe material, because like I read pretty much most of the Clone Wars stuff and a lot of the stuff set during the OT and a ton of Old Republic stuff by that point. But I was kind of like, well, you know, this is where the movies are, you know, the post Return of the Jedi movie. So I'm not going to read any of the EU stuff because they're too different for me to reconcile. But after that, I was kind of like, you know what, I'm going to try Heir to the Empire. So I remember that Christmas, actually, it was like literally a few days after Rise of Skywalker came out. I was like, hey, is it too late for me to ask for this book for Christmas? and my parents got it for me. And so I read that one. And then I was like, wait, now I need the other two. And so I just... After that, I just started loading up on post Return of the Jedi stuff, reading through it, ripping through it as fast as I could, and still haven't completed everything, but I've gotten most of the basics down. And I would definitely say, particularly like where you have more direct comparisons, whether it be Dark Empire versus Rise of Skywalker, or Legacy of the Force versus, you know, kind of the whole sequel trilogy, similar things there, or the Jedi Prince books and the sequel trilogy, right? Because there's a lot of similarities there too.
Yeah.
Or even like, you know, you could compare like Book of Boba Fett and the Bounty Hunter Wars trilogy, right? You know, there are very few instances where I can make direct comparisons and say that, you know, the way the Disney canon has done things has just been far inferior to what the expanded universe did. And for me, that's been a little bit disappointing, because there's so much potential there. And especially like, you know, I forget exactly, I think this was right before The Rise of Skywalker came out. Kathleen Kennedy said something like, each one of these movies is a tough shell to crack, or a tough nut to crack, because we don't have any
novels or source books.
We don't have any source material, and all of these are, you know, we're pulling out of nowhere. And even then, whenever, you know, everything hadn't fully collapsed for me, I was like, wait a second, that's just like not true. Whenever Disney bought Star Wars in 2012 and you were appointed president, you were fully aware that these things existed. And so it just seems like a lot of squandered potential, because it's not even really like an issue of like, oh, the medium, like this isn't going to adapt well to screen, you know, or even like, oh, we can't produce this because of this excuse or this excuse or this excuse. Like, I get maybe, you know, you can't do a live action Shadows of the Empire in, you know, 2015 or whatever, because all the actors are too old to go back and, you know, play those roles. And even at the time, the de-aging technology would not have, you know, been up to par for them to try something like that. So I get like, you can't do everything. You can't adapt everything to screen, but like, you know, even New Jedi Order would have been, you know, all the actors would have been old enough to, or been the proper age to, you know, play those versions of those characters. And And New Jedi Order is huge, right? It'd be better suited to a TV show than a trilogy of movies. But even still, if you wanted to do 3 movies and then do an animated show that takes place in between the movies, like with something like Clone Wars or even Resistance, which is what they did with the sequel trilogy. But you could definitely have done something way better with something like that. But I'm sure I could go into like a million thoughts on every single one of those things if you have any more specific questions.
I wanted to ask, due to kind of the Shadows of the Empire, as your awesome background shows us, with the fan film that you're making, when in your forays into the expanded universe did you first encounter Shadows of the Empire? What were your first thoughts? What was your initial reaction? Did you instantly really, really enjoy it? And what facet of Shadows of the Empire did you discover first? Because there's a book, there's comic books, like several comic books. There's an audio drama as well, or not an audio drama, a soundtrack. There's a soundtrack there. There's a video game. There's all of this media for Shadows of the Empire. So, what did you discover first?
So, like I said before, with my school's library growing up, they had a bunch of young readers books, and I had the junior novel of Shadows of the Empire, which was my first introduction. And it wasn't until I think it was 2020 when I read the full novel for the first time, because growing up I was like, I already know the story, I don't need to go and reread another novel when there's all these other novels for me to read. But when I did get around to reading the full thing and the comic around that time, I did grow up. I don't actually have a physical copy of the junior novel, but I brought some props here. But here is the box of Shadows of the Empire.
Yeah, the N64.
We'll stop keying it out. There you go. Yep. And it is this beautiful game cartridge. So I definitely played that game a lot, and then after that, I was like, wait, this is like a really cool multimedia project. And I just kind of started going into everything. There's scenes that show up in Tales of the Bounty Hunters, in the Therefore I Am, the story about IG-88. There's a whole bunch of stuff in there that's completely missing from the comic that is pretty cool. And in Tales from Jabba's Palace, there's stuff about that in A Barv Like That, which most people remember that story and they think, oh, it's Boba Fett trying to get out of the Sarlacc pit. But the actual first third of that story is a recounting of his duel with IG-88. And it also gets shown. I have the omnibus here because I don't have the actual short ones. But if I can find it here,
is that the Galoob comic in there and stuff like that?
The Galoob and
Hasbro, that one too.
No, it was Ertl.
That's the one. Yeah.
Galoob and Ertl. I cannot seem to find it in this. It's a big omnibus, as you can see. But the Galoob and Ertl toy comics, which were printed with some of the Hasbro toys, or rather Galoob and Ertl toys, which I think those were both licensed by Hasbro in some way. But anyways, yeah. So those comics have stuff from it, and each of those comics has panels that do not show up anywhere else, which is very interesting. It's like every single place that something from Shadows of the Empire shows up, there's always something new in it. There's also the Shadows of the Empire RPG source book, which I don't actually have physically, but I do have it digitally. And that is loaded with these micro short stories that take up, most of them less than a page. And most of them are just these really cool things. Like one of my favorite ones is there's actually, I think it's 2 or 3 different ones in the source book that show up, but it's these Noghri assassins that Vader hires to go and I think the first one is titled The Backup Plan, right? Okay. But Vader, he has this assassin named Jix in Shadows of the Empire, and Vader basically gives Jix this mission: make sure Luke Skywalker doesn't get killed. Right? That was pretty much Jix's mission, because some mysterious person was trying to kill Luke Skywalker, and Vader couldn't figure out who it was. Spoiler alert: it was the main villain of the story. But anyways, Jix goes on this mission, but Vader gives these 2 Noghri assassins the job of following Jix and making sure that his loyalties are in place and that he doesn't mess up. And
And
But
that's
that's not.
original to the West End Game source book.
Yeah, yeah, you don't find that anywhere else. And like, there's all these other little short stories with like Gizor and
That
the
are only
bar.
like a couple paragraphs long, right?
Yeah,
On the
and there's
pages.
these really cool things. But for my adaptation, I definitely want to include all of those little expanded things because I mean, a lot of them, like, it's not that much extra work, but it's like pulling in the entirety of this multimedia project, which I think at the end, whenever all of this is finished, it's going to be a great adaptation. But I also have, this is my like reading copy. This is just a paperback. This is what I use when I want to just kind of flip through pages really fast. And then I have a hardcover here. This is my bookshelf
Nice.
beauty right here. And then, of course, here's the comic book trade paperback. One of the things with my comic collection, I don't really like single issues. I think they're too small and too flimsy.
Yeah.
I think omnibuses are a little bit too big for me personally. There's some things that only exist in omnibus form, so I get those whenever I can. But the trade paperbacks are definitely my favorite thing to collect.
Mine too.
Favorite thing to read as well. So I try to get these whenever I can.
They're the
And then
nicest size for reading, I'd say, and they look nice on the shelves.
And then this right here is called The Battle of the Bounty Hunters. It is a pop-up comic, as you can see. And again, this is that same scene with Boba Fett and IG-88, which is actually the very first scene that I'm working on and plan to release. It's not technically the first chronologically, but there's a few things 3D model wise, voice acting wise, that it's just going to be way too long before I can get the very first scene chronologically and release them that way. So I'm thinking I already have all the 3D models. Mostly, I'll get to that in a second, but I have pretty much everything I need 3D model wise to do that scene. All the voice acting's already done, and a lot of the sound effects are fairly simple because they all already exist and are easy to find, whether it's in game rips or just on the internet or whatever. And so that's going to be the first scene that we do. The only other thing, I still need to explore this a little bit more deeply, but Shadows of the Empire is really the only story in the expanded universe set between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. Yeah. Except for, whoops, if you'll forgive me for 1 second.
Pages.
Yeah, this one, that didn't happen just now. This binding's been like that for a while. I just forgot it was this one.
I have a couple like that too.
But these 3 volumes right here, this is 3, 4, and 5 of the Marvel comics.
Yeah.
The original 1970s and 80s Marvel comics for Star Wars. A lot of those issues actually take place in between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. And for the adaptation, there might be some stuff that I find in there where I'm like, you know what, this actually fits really good with Shadows of the Empire. So let me see how I can work this in there. There's one other thing that fits into Shadows of the Empire. I think I listed it all there. Yeah, I got all my props set up over here. But the only other thing that fits in is X-Wing Alliance, which has a X-Wing's pilot's view of the Saprosa attack, which is the one where Luke and Dash go to retrieve what they don't know is the second Death Star plans. When Mon Mothma says, many Bothans died to bring us this information, many Bothans died to bring us the information that there was these plans on the ship called the Saprosa, but it was actually Luke and Dash who actually go and do the Rogue 2 mission, so to speak, right? Kind of like Rogue 1, Rogue 2. But so yeah, there's a lot of games, a lot of comics, a lot of books and short stories that really tie in to make this one really big and incredibly cohesive story. There's a few things, like if you look at the details where there's slight variations on how certain scenes are told in different mediums. I think the game probably has the most of that because there's certain ways that the scenes go in the game that are semi-irreconcilable with the novel. But one of the things that I want to do in the adaptation is kind of some of those sequences, like, for instance, the Battle of Gaul. That's probably one of the biggest ones because it's in the comic, it's in the novel, and it's in the game. And I think it's in the Ertl comic as well. But the Battle of Gaul, Dash Rendar, he like leaves everybody. He's like, you told me to show you where Boba Fett's ship was, but you didn't You didn't tell me to fight, so I'm not doing that. And you're not paying me for it, so I'm out of here. But in the game, he actually parks his ship and he goes and fights Boba Fett, tries to stop him from leaving. And so I'm kind of thinking to myself, it'd be really cool if, like, Dash Rendar publicly to everybody else, he's like this, I'm not going to do anything if you don't pay me. And, I'm not putting my life at risk. I'm this tough guy, whatever. But when no one's looking, he's actually going and kind of doing some hero stuff, which is actually somewhat consistent with how he acts in like Shadow games, for instance, because
absolutely.
You kind of see from some of his backstory there, which isn't touched on almost at all in Shadows of the Empire. He's got a legitimate grudge against the Imperials. And so, whether it's the Empire at Gaul or even Boba Fett, he's got reason to actually fight the Empire, but he kind of has this outward persona that he likes to show other people. And so that's kind of something that for my adaptation where there are some differences between the mediums, I think I can make it work in the adaptation without really deviating too much from the source material. And like another thing, the swoop bike attack, which is in the game, book, and comic as well. In the game, you mostly just see Dash chasing down all of these bikers, and he takes out most of them, and then only a few end up actually getting to Luke, which is kind of one of those in-universe explanations of like, how come all these swoop bikers didn't take out Luke? Well, it's because Dash Rendar took out most of them.
Yeah.
But then afterwards, there's this little cutscene, and the dialogue is very similar to how it is in the book and the comic, but that cutscene kind of transitions from the swoop bike attack scene to the Saprosa attack scene, and then in the game they completely leave out Bothan Boo and Koth Malan and all the Bothans. All that stuff is left out of the game. So the cutscene there kind of shortens and truncates that sequence of events to just a very brief conversation, whereas in the comic, and even more so in the novel, you get a lot more kind of story in between those two things. And so where there's differences like that, I'm going to defer to what's the more detailed version. Anyways, yeah. One other thing I want to show you here that I got. There's a sister to this that I do not have, but this is Boba Fett and IG-88 here.
Yeah.
And this comes with the Kenner exclusive Shadows of the Empire comic. When I bought this, I was really like debating, should I open this box or not? Because I want to read the comic.
Yeah.
I am so glad that I didn't, because I did a lot of research on it. And if anyone else out there is a toy collector or comic collector, know this. The Kenner comics that come with the toys are just a few pages pulled out of the main Shadows of the Empire comic. There is no new panels, no new story, no new text that is in those comics that you can't find in the main comic. And so if you buy the toy and you're like, if there's something special in this comic book I need to read, that's not true at all. I was like, I saw it in a store and I was like, I got to get that because that might be stuff I've not read yet. And then I got it. I went home and I sat there and I was like, should I open it? Should I read it? I don't want to take a risk. What if it's the same thing, but it's called something different? And even Wikipedia didn't have a ton of answers there because it just said, part of the Shadows of the Empire multimedia project is you have this, and this, and then at the bottom, Kenner Special 1, Kenner Special 2. And I was like, I don't know. And so I ended up finding, I think it was on Reddit, someone had mentioned that, no, it's not even a full issue. It's just like maybe a third or a quarter of an issue pulled out of the comic. I think for this specific one, all it is the like 8 or 9 pages from Shadows of the Empire issue 1, and it's just the scene with Boba Fett and IG-88 battling above Tatooine, which ironically the only thing that doesn't appear in is in the novel. It's referenced in the novel, but it does not appear in the novel or the game. Actually, it's referenced in the game, but doesn't actually appear. But it has like I think 7 or 8 different places where you actually see either in text or in comic form the actual scene between Boba Fett and IG-88.
The actual
which has been really cool, being the first scene that I'm working on, because there's so much source material for this one scene. And one of the things, there's another guy, he's in my Discord, and he posts a lot of stuff in there. His name's Ben. But he actually has been very instrumental in helping me adapt this scene, because he actually, way back in the 90s, whenever he was in high school, read the Tales of the Bounty Hunters and Tales from Jabba's Palace's version of that scene. He hadn't read Shadows of the Empire yet at that time, I don't think. If I'm wrong, I'm sorry, Ben. But he actually went through many of those short stories and just storyboarded them. He just drew really good sketches of those scenes. And so he's been very helpful. We've taken a lot of those shots that he did way back in the 90s when it was fresh in print, and sketched them out and
Great that he still had them after all these years.
Yeah, I know. And like, especially back then, most people didn't have ways to digitally scan stuff like that. You know, maybe like, big companies had that kind of technology back then, but most people didn't have that like in the home. I don't have that in my house, actually. I could just take a picture and maybe do some photo editing to make it look more legit. But yeah, he still had those after all these years, and he got scans of them, and we've used those to create animatics. And we're currently working on the previs. I think we've got like 8 or 9 shots pre-visualized, just kind of very rough, basic animation, nothing worth going home about. 3 of those shots actually showed up in the trailer, so I did actually put a lot more work into those specific shots based on all the stuff that we were able to actually kind of show there. But just want to give some credit as well. The IG-2000 model, which is one of the best 3D models that I've actually got for this project, even though it only appears in this one scene. But the IG-2000 model actually came from the gentleman over at Pudu FX. They've done the Descendants of Order 66 fan film series. Okay. I think they shot it back in the 2000s, but they didn't finish post-production until like the last 5 or 6 years. But they put out, I think, a solid hour, maybe hour and a half of Star Wars fan film stuff. And I think it's all like kind of fan fiction writing. It's not like adaptations of anything, but they had this really awesome 3D model of the IG-2000 that I think I found on ArtStation. The artist who made it had posted images there, and I just messaged them and I was like, excuse me, I really like your model, and I'm not as expert of a 3D model to make something like this on my own. Would y'all mind to share that with me, or could I buy it, or what? And they just said, you can have it for free, and just give us credit. And so, but
that's awesome.
Everything else has either been sourced from places like Sketchfab or CG Trader, which are these 3D model trading websites. Find a lot of stuff on there for free. Some of it's paid, but if it is paid, it's like less than $20 for even good stuff. Some stuff is like $200 or whatever. I'm not touching any of that stuff, but I did buy the IG-88 model on Sketchfab. I think that one was only like $10. But it was a really good model. So I was like, why waste, 20 hours trying to make this myself when all the mesh and the textures, and the only thing it was missing was a rig. But thankfully droids are a lot easier to rig than, like human characters and stuff like that are. So that wasn't an issue, but a lot of that stuff gets shown in the trailer. You kind of see the exterior of Slave One, IG-2000, IG-88, Boba Fett. Some stuff has been modified from video game rips. So there's 3D models that you can kind of rip from video games if you have the software to do so. A lot of modding kind of software, but there's a Discord server called Battlefront 2 Mods that has been pretty helpful because a lot of those people are a lot smarter at me than modding, and I'm not trying to make video game mods. I just want 3D models with good textures, but I've modified a lot of those myself, just kind of for like film use, because the way they do things in video games, they really try to save every single bit of space on games because they're so big, and so they have to do all kinds of tricks to lose detail or hide lack of detail in order to make it look good for a video game. But for a 3D animation, whenever you want it to be higher quality, the file sizes can be bigger, right? And so I've gone through and kind of modified some things so that they're higher polygon meshes, higher resolution textures. They're not channel packed textures, because some things like this is going a little bit into, CG work here, but you'll have like a color texture, and then you'll have like a roughness texture, a bump map, a metalness map, ambient occlusion, right? There's like 10 or so different maps that you can use for 3D animation, but a lot of those maps in video games, they channel pack them. So if it's a black and white map, like metalness, for instance, where you either have it's black or white. White is metal, black is non-metal. they'll put that in the green channel of the texture, and then in the red channel they'll put the roughness map, and then in the blue channel they'll put a different map. And I'm like, no, that's way too complicated for just basic rendering and animation and stuff. So I have to kind of split it up and modify the textures and stuff like that, kind of make them my own, and then adding some detail with the mesh on the 3D model so that they're not losing any detail in any areas. Probably the biggest problem for me right now to overcome before I can actually kind of finish most of the shots and get the scene out is the interior of Slave One, which has been pretty difficult because in every single comic version of Slave One, it looks different. In every single text version of Slave One, the space is described a little differently. Probably the only actual version where you can see most of the Slave One in its entirety is in The Mandalorian Season 2. Even in Book of Boba Fett, they don't really show a whole lot of like the lower decks and stuff. It's mostly just cockpit and door. But in The Mandalorian Season 2, they did, I think, an actually good job. And believe it or not, I watched the behind the scenes on those. Jon Favreau actually said that he was reading expanded universe content whenever he was trying to figure out how the interior of the Slave One looked. He referenced Tales from Jabba's Palace, Tales of the Bounty Hunters, and some of the reference books and guidebooks that had come out in the 2000s and stuff like that. And so I actually have, if you could let me share my screen here, a 3D walkthrough of the Slave One as I have it right now. It's very like low quality because, I think it's like a 10-second little loop here. But it kind of shows the basic block out. I haven't added any of the details yet, and the rendering quality and lighting isn't very good, but I'd love to show this to everybody.
Absolutely.
Here. I've shown this to my patrons already. They've had it for a little over a week now, I think, and they all had some good feedback for it. But let me see here. I think I can actually just upload this file here. That would be nice. Boom.
Look at that. Wow. Oh man, that looks awesome.
So as you can kind of see there, and you can kind of look at some different areas. You can sort of see some of the stuff here has 0 textures on it. I literally just gave it like a black material or something like that. But you can see on the where this Boba Fett on the left here is standing, that's kind of like a brig area where Boba Fett keeps his prisoners. Again, right now it's just an empty space. There's no details in there. And then in here, this is the lower kind of observation deck area. And then it rotates like that. And then behind it here is a ladder, and you go up this ladder and into the cockpit, and then boom. And I actually had some help on this cockpit from a guy named Jack Uglow. He actually made the Millennium Falcon lobby that I showed in some of my update videos. But I reached out to him and I was like, is there anything else you'd like to do other than just donate this thing that, he made it a few years ago and posted it on ArtStation. But he seemed pretty enthusiastic. So he's did some work on the mesh in there because obviously the original kind of model that I downloaded was only the exterior, didn't really have any interior detailing. And so he was a big help with that. He did the ladder and the kind of area right behind the cockpit there. And then he did most of the kind of geometry there in the cockpit. So yeah.
Absolutely awesome. Thank you very much for showing us that. As you've sort of alluded to so far regarding the work to the project, can I first ask you what got you interested in making animated fan animations? You created your channel, started working on videos about a year ago, I think, right?
It was mid-January of last year, yeah.
Yeah.
So a little over 13 months now.
And the first thing I saw that you'd put out was put out some stuff in regards to Boba Fett Wreckage.
Yes.
Starting to show some adaptations for Expanded Universe comic material, very exciting stuff. And then there was sort of a pivot a couple of months later to focus on the Shadows of the Empire fan project. What inspired you to start the channel? What inspired you to start animation? Do you have any background in any kind of animation, or are you just learning as you go along? Tell us about this.
I'll kind of start with kind of my college education. I went to a media production school, and I got a degree. I think the actual degree is called media communications, but the emphasis there is in film production. And I'd worked on a lot of like film sets and stuff like that. A lot of tons of student films, probably close to 100 student films I worked on. Ranging between like 5 and 20 minutes. And then I worked on a few TV shows that you can find on Amazon right now. One of them's called Remnant 13, and one of them's, I forget what the actual title of it is. It's like a basketball documentary kind of show where they interview a lot of basketball players, but I worked on the set of that. And then probably the biggest thing I worked on in terms of, actual like live action stuff is it's a movie called Wicked Moms Club. Came out on Lifetime back in, I think it was 2018 or 2019. I never actually watched it. I didn't. I was a camera assistant on it, and so I did like a lot of lens swapping. I was the guy doing the slate. That's something that a lot of camera assistants do.
Gotcha.
Making sure all the batteries are charged for all the monitors on the camera and all the other doodads that they have on there. But, so I worked on a lot of like live action stuff. That was kind of what my education was. But one of the things I got really interested in when I was in film school was visual effects. And so I learned a lot of 3D stuff. I learned a lot of compositing stuff as well. And I used that on a lot of my personal projects. And I was one of the only guys at my school who was doing stuff like that too. So I kind of had a little bit of a monopoly on that to a certain degree. Some people did like very simple effects like cloning someone where you have, someone talking to themselves. That's probably the easiest visual effect you can do right now. But I was doing things that were like green screen and complete CG backgrounds and, energy stuff, particle sims, destruction sims, that sort of stuff. Smoke and fire simulations. And so I did a lot of that stuff. And then I kind of stopped doing that for a little while. I had a job for a time doing a lot of sort of educational videos. So I worked at a university and would interview professors if they would talk about subjects, and they would post it for their students and that kind of stuff. And recently I've been doing a lot of kind of freelance videography. So just, like stuff like weddings, commercials, event recaps, that sort of stuff. And but about a year ago, whenever I decided I wanted to do this, I was kind of like riding high on Expanded Universe. I just tore through like one novel a week. I was in that stage where like my days were oriented around like, how much time I could spend reading.
Yes.
And I was around the same time I discovered Darth Angelus's Heir to the Empire adaptation, and now it's Spikey Tortoise, but at the time it was Wilkins Animation. But his Dark Empire adaptation, and I was like, these things are really cool, and I was like, what if I did something like that in 3D animation? Because I had some skill there, and definitely a lot of my skills when it comes to animation. I wouldn't say I'm the best at modeling or texturing or rigging, but actual animation and kind of sort of the virtual filmmaking aspect, like lighting and camera placement, what kind of virtual lens you're using.
What you went to college for? Applies.
And so that's definitely a lot more my forte there. I can model and texture some very basic things, and I'll have to do that. I'm getting better at it because I'm having to in order to do this project. Learn a lot more things. And then same with Unreal Engine as well. That's something where like I'm still fairly new at Unreal Engine. A lot of the same 3D principles as other 3D programs like Blender, which is probably what I have the most experience with. But there definitely are a lot that I still have to learn, especially if I'm going to complete this as one whole thing. But Unreal Engine at the time, just before I started the channel, they'd come out with MetaHuman, which is like, I've shown some of that on my channel, but it's probably the most realistic free way to make digital characters, because Unreal Engine is a free program and MetaHuman is a free plugin for Unreal Engine. And it's a really easy way to make very good looking 3D characters. And they have a way where you can upload pictures or a 3D model of a head, and it will generate the closest thing that
that's so cool,
approximate to that. And so that has been pretty helpful. probably the biggest issue with MetaHuman right now is getting clothes on it. I've had a Leia MetaHuman done for months, but the outfit that she wears in her nightmare scene, which I have the set for, I have everything I need for that scene, other than her clothes attached to the body. Every single time I try to rig it on there, there's like her arm would move and then nothing would come with it, right? Or especially because it's a very loose fitting clothing, I have to do cloth simulation and stuff like that. And that's very new to me in Unreal Engine. I could do it in Blender, but the problem is that you can't really import metahumans into Blender unless you just want to render them as still objects, because the rig that metahumans are on, you can really only animate it properly either in Maya, which is an expensive 3D program I've never used before, or doing it natively in Unreal. And there's some motion capture out there. The thing that I'm sure you've seen the Knights of the Old Republic Unreal Cinema stuff where they had Malik, the Malik short film, and then they were going to do episode 1, The Endar Spire. I don't know if you saw, I was in their Discord, and basically some of the members who were on the team announced that the creator was not moving forward with that he was doing pretty much everything all by himself, and either had some health issues or something. They were very ambiguous about it, so I'm not going to pretend like I know exactly why, but they did say that the person behind the project is just not going to move forward with it anymore. So if that's news to anyone, sorry to be the bearer of bad news. I was really looking forward to it. The Malik short film is still really cool. It's still out there. And of course, the trailer for Endar Spire still exists. You can still watch it and get excited. But they use something, I'm blanking on the name right now. I've mentioned it in some of my videos. I can't remember what it's called, but it's a motion capture system where you basically set up like 2 or 3 or maybe even 4 cell phones, and then you do your action, and then you upload that footage into their server, and they generate motion capture without a suit. So all you have to have, you can get 4 friends together and be like, hey, can I borrow your phone for an hour? And but the thing is that service is a pretty expensive subscription service. Right now, I'm not able to pay for that. If and when I am, I will definitely be investing in that, because that would be a great way to get really good motion capture. One of the best things that you can do with that is hands, because motion capture for hands is probably the most difficult thing. Almost every service that does suits or video to mocap either doesn't do hands, or you have to buy special things for the hands that are almost as expensive as a full body suit in and of itself. With metahumans, you can actually just use your phone here, and your LiDAR camera that's on it, if it has a LiDAR camera, will actually be able to track your face like really, really good. It's probably not going to be as good as like Andy Serkis doing Gollum or something like that, that type of motion capture, but it's pretty darn good motion capture on a metahuman. And so, but I'm still learning a lot of that stuff personally, which is another reason why I'm doing Battle of the Bounty Hunters first, because there's no faces in it, so I don't have to worry about that. And
helpful.
Yes. And IG-88 is very simple to animate because he's a droid. And Boba Fett is, I have a good rig for Boba Fett. There's a service called AccuRig. It's totally free, so anyone else out there who is interested in 3D stuff, AccuRig is totally free, and it rigs hands pretty good too, which is, again, hands are one of the really big issues, hands and faces, when it comes to rigging and animation. Full body stuff is actually not that difficult, especially if you have reference footage. If you have a person walking, it's pretty easy just to copy their motion in 3D. But getting hands right and getting faces right is very challenging. And so, but AccuRig does pretty good hands. I'm pretty happy with that. And so that's what I have on Boba Fett right now. And pretty much right now, again, the interior of Slave One is the biggest hurdle for me to get over. I've made a lot of progress this week. What I showed you right there, that little loop right there, probably took about 10 hours to make. Part of that was actually getting it set up, and then the other part was actually trying to figure out, like, okay, how am I going to render this out so I can show people? Going back to Wreckage, because I've gotten pretty off topic here. Whenever I decided to do Wreckage, my thought was, what's the easiest thing I can do? And Boba Fett Wreckage has 0 characters with faces that appear anywhere else. I think Boba Fett has one line in it, so I didn't have to worry about much voice acting on his part. And none of the other characters have voice acting that appears anywhere else either. So I was like, okay, it's pretty simple. It's got Slave One, it's got Boba Fett, it's got the inside of a wrecked Star Destroyer, and then it's got a Imperial officer's office, right? So very few sets, very few stuff like that. And I was making some progress on it. I got maybe 3 or 4 shots done, and I had the interior of the Star Destroyer, especially when it's wrecked, because anytime there's damage and hanging wires and all that, it's like 10 times the detail in order to make it look right. But I was starting to work on that, and then I had the thought, I was like, you know what, Shadows of the Empire, that would be cool. So I put it out to my patrons on Patreon and put it to a vote. Basically said, you guys are the ones financing these adaptations. What do you want to see? And almost everyone said Shadows of the Empire. Like, it was actually, yeah, it was unanimous. Not one person voted differently. And I was like, okay. So I decided I'll put Wreckage on hold for a little while. That means that I probably would have had Wreckage done by this point if I had only worked on that. But I've made a lot of progress on Shadows so far. I have a pretty large model library, even stuff that takes place in the final few scenes of the movie that doesn't show up before then. I've got some of those models ready to go. And part of that's just been me being diligent, searching the internet for free or cheap 3D models that I'm like, I can get that. And I've also had some people on my team. I just released the other day the Gladiator and Lebo, those 3D models, which were made by Admiral Zoda. He has a YouTube channel himself. And he's working on a Galactic Battlegrounds mod that basically, it's called Expanding Fronts. But it basically has like different factions like Black Sun and other stuff like that. So they make 3D models to make the sprite sheets for the mod, because it's a 2D, game. But they use 3D models in order to make the sprite sheets that they use for that. And he was like, hey, I can give these to you. And there's a few things that they're still working on right now that they want to add to the game, but are also affiliated with Shadows of the Empire, like Gizor Skyhook. Is one that they're working on. And I've been very blessed to have a lot of people volunteer their time and energy either to donate stuff that they've already made, or are working on stuff right now specifically for this project, or if it's a double dipping kind of thing where it's something they want for themselves, but they're also like, hey, I can contribute to this project at the same time. Someone's working on a 3D model of Gizor right now, which is really exciting. I don't know if you've seen he goes by a bunch of different names depending on where he's at, but he's made all those really good 3D models of like Zinj and Melvar and the Jedi Knight or Dark Forces 2 Jedi Knight villains like Jarek and the others there. And trying to think. He's put out a lot of really good, like a lot of the Grand Admirals and stuff like that. He's made a bunch of 3D models for stuff that takes place kind of during X-Wing and Courtship of Princess Leia and Dark Forces.
Nice
that stuff.
Yeah.
But he's been very generous as well with kind of donating some of those things. And he himself is paying someone to make a Gizor model. Now he wants that for himself as well. So it's not like he's paying someone else just to donate that to me. But I'm very thankful that he's willing. He actually bumped it up in his priority list, because he was like, hey, if you need it, I'll bump it up. I was going to maybe do this in like 6 months or a year, but the sooner I can get it to you, the better. So I've been very grateful that I've had a lot of people working on this. I've had a ton of people ask me about voice acting, which is really cool. Almost all the roles are cast, but not all of them. So
is there a way to contact you for a list of roles that aren't cast yet?
So my Discord server is, I'll probably respond to that faster than anything, but you can also reach me at my email at starwarsfananimations@gmail.com. No spaces, no dots, no underscores, or nothing. So, what you see there on the screen there, just take out the spaces and add gmail.com at the end. And that's another way you can reach me.
I have a bunch of friends who are super talented in voice acting. I've tried my hand at it, not good at it at all. But I have some friends who are super talented, and a bunch of them were like, when they found out about the interview, they were like, hey, could you ask him if he has any more roles? So it sounds like a lot of it's cast, but there's still some need for more voice talent.
For sure.
Potentially.
Especially for a lot of like the Nogri assassins, those obviously aren't cast. And a lot of parts that maybe show up for only a couple scenes still aren't cast yet. Let me actually pull up here. I have a list of all the stuff that's not cast. I can tell you. So I do not yet have a Guri. I've had someone reach out saying they're interested, but I haven't heard any recordings of them yet. So that audition process is still open. So Guri, Jix, and also let's see here, Vieira Charon. She's the tech that sabotages Wes Jansen's R2 unit at the Battle of Gaul. But she has a fairly small role. But Vieira Charon, Will Scotian, he's also a Rogue Squadron pilot. Sivar, who is the Saprosa captain, and another thing too is a lot of the roles that I'm going to be doing with AI. Some people may not know a lot of the roles that are from the movies, like Luke, Leia, Lando. I do plan to kind of synthesize those voices with AI, but one thing that I do want to do is have real voice actors driving the performance.
Yeah.
So what you saw in the Shadows of the Empire trailer, all of that was me, actually. I don't plan to be the final voice for a lot of that, but a lot of that was me just kind of doing really bad impressions and using AI to make it sound like
sound more like the original people.
Yeah. But
that way there's still like tone, inflection,
exactly.
emotion. Yeah.
And I do have, actually, I was very tempted. There's a guy who sent me a Luke reel, and his Luke is like really good. Like it's very, very close to Mark Hamill. It's just far enough that I'm like, I obviously know this is a voice actor doing Luke, but honestly, it's better voice actor than the Luke who did Shadows of the Empire in the game. That guy, he sounded a little less Mark Hamill to me, and but this guy, he's going to be doing all of the Luke performance driving. But all of the other cast members that are OT cast members, I do not currently have a person who's like, I'm the one who's doing all of the input voice acting. And kind of describe it for people who don't know. Basically, like, I'll get a lot of audio samples of a person talking. One of the easiest ones is Lando, because Billy D. Williams, his voice hasn't changed in 40 years. And he also has done a ton of video game work. So he did Jedi Academy. He's been in Battlefront 1 and 2. And in Battlefront 2, he was part of the story mode. So he actually had a lot of voice acting stuff there. Lego Star Wars, Lando has done all the... Billy D. Williams has done all the Lando stuff for the Lego Star Wars games. So Billy D. Williams has literally hours of him talking as Lando that I have as clean audio, no music interfering, no sound effects or nothing, clean audio that I was able to get. And so I was able to get a really good voice clone of him that I could use for just about anything. And basically I take a bunch of samples and I upload it to 11 Labs, which is the service I'm using. It's a paid subscription service. The lowest tier is not very expensive at all. And you get a limited number of characters a month for text that you can type. For speech to speech, it's somewhat similar. Speech to speech is basically where, let's say I talk into a microphone and I say, hello, I would like to do this. And then I input that in, and then it takes the other person's voice and basically has that person say it. So it's going to be the exact same pacing, exact number of seconds, but just like the pitch and all that stuff is going to be different. So obviously I don't sound like Billy D. Williams, but if I, try and do a really bad impression, like, hello, Leia, how are you? Something like that, it's just going to adjust the pitch.
Yeah.
And a little bit of the cadence and kind of overtones there to sound just like Billy D. Williams. I think that's all I mentioned there. There's a few other parts that I just haven't listed yet because I'm still like going through all the material over and over again, trying to have a really comprehensive list. I'm really happy with our Gizor voice actor. He's recorded, I think right now, the first 12 chapters of the novel. And
wow.
And one of the things I actually, I've not said this all that much publicly, but anyone who's interested in voice acting for anything on the channel ought to know. One of the things I'm doing with all my voice actors is that if they're not using AI at all, right? Because if they are, as much as I would love to have the same person do the driving performance. You know, I can swap people out and it would still sound very similar in terms of the final voice output. But for all the other voice actors, I'm having them record all those characters' lines in all their other expanded universe appearances. So with Xizor, that's what is it? Rookie's Rendezvous, right? That's one. Shadow Games.
Yep.
He briefly appears, I believe it is, in Rebel Dawn of the Han Solo trilogy, just kind of as a hologram. The Coruscant Knights books,
Bounty Hunter Wars 2, and some flashback stuff.
Bounty Hunter Wars. He actually has a lot of monologuing in Bounty Hunter Wars.
Yes,
I remember one chapter. I think it was in the second book, or maybe it was the first book. I know it's not in the third, but there's one scene where it's like 30 pages of Xizor, Vader, and the Emperor talking.
Yep.
And they just start they just kind of start talking in circles.
It just goes on and on and on.
Yep. And I mean, there's a lot of information in there, you know, but at the same time, like, I kind of wish that was broken up into 2 separate scenes with some interlude in between, right?
Yeah.
But anyways, I went through, and this has been another thing that's been taking a lot of my time too, is I've been going through all of these texts, and thankfully I have digital copies, like ebooks of all of these, so I can just search the word Xizor, and I can find every single chapter that he's in, every single, you know, paragraph, every single line that he has. I can find pretty quickly and copy and paste it into a document and read through it pretty quickly. And same thing with a lot of the other actors or characters and stuff too. So anyways, I'm having all the voice actors before I release anything that character is in, because one thing that I really don't like is recasting, especially in animation, because it's like, there's not as much of an excuse, you know, because of like aging or certain things like that. Like, you know, obviously I think Ewan McGregor is a great Obi-Wan Kenobi, but, and Alec Guinness had already passed away by the time the prequel started shooting. So it wasn't like you were going to be able to do de-aging on Alec Guinness and get him to play Obi-Wan, right? But you know, major age differences is one thing, but like, you know, even Solo: A Star Wars Story, I was very taken out of it. The whole movie, I was like, you know, like very much so looking at Alden Ehrenreich, like, that's not Han Solo, right? There was actually Shamook, who he did a lot of YouTube deepfakes, but Disney hired him for Book of Boba Fett after he did a really good deepfake of Luke at the end of Mandalorian season 2. That was better than what they did for the actual show. But Shamook actually did a few scenes from Solo: A Star Wars Story where they deepfaked Harrison Ford's face on it, and it like immediately I was like, like I just kind of had like a little like, that looks so much better. But yeah, recasting is something that really bothers me. On a similar note, I'm gonna brief interlude. So I've been watching through Ewoks recently. I'd never seen it before.
Yeah,
I'm about halfway through season 2 right now.
And they changed the voice actors over the season.
Every single voice actor was different, and most of them weren't just like different people doing a similar sound. Like Logray and Chief Chirpa, their voices dropped like 5 octaves, you know, and a lot of them just sound totally different from the first season. Really, really bothered me. The animation style too is very different as well.
Yeah.
The animation style doesn't bother me as much after watching like 5 or 6 episodes. Like I've kind of just acclimated to it, but the voice acting, I was like, wait a second, y'all filmed these a year apart, and like you just had an entire cast boycott. I don't believe that. Y'all just didn't want these actors and you wanted to cast your own people. Anyway, but yeah, so like that's something that bothers me a lot in movies and TV shows, like the Dark Knight trilogy, for instance. There's a different Rachel in Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, right? Completely different actress, filmed very close together. Stuff like that really breaks the illusion of fiction.
Just takes you out of the story.
Yeah, and so one of the things that for my channel and stuff that I'm doing is I want to have all of these appearances recorded up front, which
all
is
your bases covered.
It's a little bit more work up front on my part and on the voice actor's part. But I think in the end, it will completely nullify any risk of recasting in the future. Because even though I'm working on Shadows of the Empire right now, you know, if it takes me 50 years, I'd have the whole EU adapted, right? I don't know if I'll ever. That's a huge goal that I don't know if it's actually attainable. But but there is a lot of projects that I would like to adapt at some point, you know, over the years. And especially like, you know, one of the reasons I picked Shadows of the Empire, in fact, is because so many characters appear in it that I can reuse their 3D models. I can reuse set locations. I can reuse voice actors in future projects. Like one of the things rather recently, as I was going through and getting Zuckuss's lines from the Bounty Hunter Wars trilogy, I was realizing, I was like, wait a second, a lot of these locations, a lot of these character models, a lot of these voice characters are very, very similar in Bounty Hunter Wars as in Shadows of the Empire. Like obviously there's like the guild headquarters and the shell huts and,
Yeah.
you know, a lot of different new places. But like if I finish Shadows of the Empire and then I wanted to do Bounty Hunter Wars, I could do it. I could do all 3 books probably in the same time as it would take me to do Shadows of the Empire. Right.
Just based on all of the pre-planning, having those voices together, having those models already made.
Exactly.
Will save you a ton of time on the turnaround for future projects.
Exactly. And Shadows of the Empire, not only does a lot of the characters and models have future appearances, but a lot of those models were already available. Right. There's been very few things that I've had to make from scratch or that people on my team have made from scratch, particularly when it comes to characters. A lot of them, like I said, Sketchfab, CG Trader, even Turbo Squid, Blend Swap, right? There's a lot of different places you can get 3D models for free or for low cost online. A lot of those things I've definitely benefited from finding those and downloading those. And I've modified most of them. There's a few like the IG-88 one where I'm like, I'm not touching this. I paid $10. It looks great. But there's a lot that I've modified. Like Luke, for instance, his outfit is completely, you know, modified clothing. Like I found a shirt and I found a jacket, but you know, the texture you see on the jacket there and the colors and all that stuff is completely custom work in texturing and materials and stuff like that. Cause it's a very distinctive outfit. You know, you can actually see a little bit of it in the lower left of my screen there on the novel cover there. But yeah, so, you know, beyond Shadows of the Empire, like there's a lot of other stuff set during the original trilogy era and the New Republic era where I can just, you know, copy and paste some of the same models I've already made. And if I already have the voice actors recorded, like, you know, I don't have to stress about casting or directing or any of that stuff with the voice actors. And all the models are already done. So I can just get a huge head start on any future adaptations. And, you know, I know for a lot of viewers who've followed me for the last year, it's probably seemed like your patience has been stretched very thin, but I promise you a lot of the work that I'm putting in right now to actually make all this stuff, it's going to have a bit of a snowball effect because like even with Shadows of the Empire, the interior of Ben Kenobi's hut shows up a lot. And, you know, I already have that model now, but, you know, especially once I have all the metahuman models finished with their clothes rigged to their bodies, which again, that's the hardest part right now because that's the one thing that MetaHuman really hasn't been able to get right, I think, so far. There's a service I recently heard about. I haven't looked into it as much as I probably should have, but it's like a $35 a month subscription where you can basically like add clothes onto a model and it automatically does all the weight painting and rigging and stuff like that to get the clothes right. So I've not checked it out yet. I don't even know if it supports like cloth simulation and stuff like that too, which would be really nice. But once I have a lot of those models done, like, you know, once I get one scene done, I can get another scene done in, you know, a tenth the time. Once all the models are done, once all the lighting is set up, once a lot of that stuff is completed now. You can kind of see in the interior of Ben Kenobi's hut. I showed that in the previs for Leia's Nightmare. A lot of the work I'm doing right now too is previs work. So, you know, all the models will be like in a T pose and their faces are just going to be still. And there's no lighting at all. Right. But you can kind of see the camera moving through and you can see how it's edited. And, you know, I could use some tent music in there and, you know, add a little bit of sound effects just to kind of get a better idea of how the adaptation of the scene is going to go. And a lot of that previous work is very helpful, especially in determining like the sequence of events. One of the things I've had to do a lot of research on and thinking about is like, what is the actual chronology of Shadows of the Empire? Because, you know, some things are pretty hard set in stone. Like obviously the Battle of Gaul is a big event and some things happen before and some things happen after. But like, you know, issue 1 of Shadows of the Empire happens before anything in the novel. But then you have some stuff where, you know, there's an interlude, or like here's an example, that same scene I mentioned earlier where Vader is talking with his assassin Jix, or not really assassin, but like henchman, or what do you call him? Agent. That's the word I'm looking for. Whenever he's talking to his agent Jix in the novel, Jix isn't in the novel. You just see a scene where Vader is, you know, hacking up an ASP droid for training purposes. But in the comic, you see that once he finishes cutting up that droid, he then goes and talks to his agent Jix. And then we see in the Weston Games RPG version of Shadows of the Empire, there's an additional little bit there. And then in the Galoob comic, we see a little bit of that same thing, but it's missing Jix again. And in the novel, that's chapter 7. But in the comic book issue, it's the very first pages of issue 2. So it's like, are those the exact same scene? I'm adapting it as if they are, but the
you
chronology
have to kind of parse stuff from the various places, figure out your own timeline.
Yep. Kind of going into the release schedule, just to kind of give people an expectation of what they can expect. I'm going to be releasing one scene at a time. So these will probably be anywhere between 2 and 5 minutes. I'm going to be releasing them more or less as they're finished. Patrons will get them first, probably for about 1 or 2 weeks. They'll have exclusive access to it. Ko-Fi donors are going to have that as well. Ko-Fi is a little less easy in terms of sharing videos because you can only put in URLs. You can't upload a video there. But like, I don't want to upload a video to YouTube and then set it to private and then try and make it public later, because that kind of can mess with the analytics somewhat. But anyways, I want to I want to give people who are actually investing in the project. And if anyone wants to invest, you can find me on Patreon, same title, Star Wars Fan Animations. It's on my About section on my YouTube page, and same with Ko-Fi as well. Ko-Fi
and it will be linked in the description as well to this video.
Appreciate it. But Ko-Fi is really good for single donations. So if you don't want to do a monthly recurring thing, you do a single donation, and for all time, you get some exclusive benefits, some exclusive posts and stuff like that. You get some stuff early as well, even if it's a smaller donation. But if you're a patron, you get a little bit more in terms of your actual stuff. You get a lot more exclusivity, a lot more updates. The people who are over there have already seen a lot more than I've shown publicly. And even if you're a free member on Patreon, because remember, both on Ko-Fi and on Patreon, you can still follow the page for free as a member. And even, there you'll actually get to see more than I post on my community section, or in my videos, or even on Twitter. I post some stuff there too, some updates. But if you're even a free member, you actually get access to a lot more stuff that's public. And but if you are an invested member, you definitely get a lot more exclusivity as well. And those people will get those things first, and they'll get them for at least a week or two, depending on how big the scene is. Like the Battle of Gaul will probably just be one sequence that I release, so it'll probably be one of the longer things. But that, because it's a little bit longer, I might give people who are invested in the project like a month in advance. But definitely want to give those people their due. But
absolutely.
But for public view, for anyone who's just watching on YouTube, I'll post them kind of as they're finished. They might be a little out of order chronologically. Again, it just depends on what voice acting's finished, what models are ready, and that kind of stuff. And I'll have them all chronologically set up in playlists and stuff like that for anyone who's confused about how the actual chronology is.
Eventually, a supercut compilation down the line.
So they're varied, yes. Something I want to do for patrons is pretty much at any moment that a new scene is out, they're going to have the current draft of it, even if it's missing a couple scenes. If it's 15 minutes, 40 minutes, an hour, like whatever's done, they'll see it in the chronological edit there. I don't know if I want to have that set up for Ko-Fi donors, especially single donation. Maybe if they're like a monthly donor or something like that, they'll have access to something like that. But if you're in one of those categories, the supercuts will be available as I'm making it. But publicly on YouTube, I'll be releasing episodes kind of as they're done. Mm-hmm. So something in the range of kind of 20 to 30 minutes after I have, maybe 10 or so scenes done and out, I'll edit together an episode kind of compilation and put that out as well. That way I just can kind of upload more frequently those things and have a shorter turnaround time on when people get something new. And with Shadows of the Empire, because it is such a big multimedia project, it's very difficult to do just like chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3. Oh, and then here's issue 1, issue 2. Here's game level 1, game level 2. And I don't want anyone to be confused about the chronology. So releasing it as scenes can kind of actually help people follow the chronology, and then of course releasing as episodes as well. Kind of, I'm thinking for the first few releases here, in terms of what the episodes will be, will probably be 2 episodes set before the Battle of Gaul.
Okay.
And then the Battle of Gaul would be like episode 3, more or less.
Yeah.
And what's beyond that, I haven't quite looked that far in terms of how I actually want to cut it and release it outside of just one scene at a time. And some things are going to be sequences rather than scenes, but I'm going to call it a scene because like for instance, the Battle of Gaul, from the moment, the Outrider Millennium Falcon drop out of hyperspace to the moment they leave in defeat, that's a sequence, right? That's really impossible to just release as one scene because it cuts back and forth between so many different groups of people.
Yeah.
But of course, there's like a scene before that as they're headed to Gaul, and then there's the scene after that where they're all sad. And those will be released kind of separately, but cut together as an episode later on. But yeah.
Very, very exciting stuff. Very, very exciting to hear future plans and that you're planning for projects down the line a little bit. Do you have any idea when we might see something like Wreckage return? Any timetable for when we could see that short film come to your YouTube?
So I'll have to put this to a vote to patrons at a later time because to a certain degree, they're the ones kind of making decisions on, what takes priority, because if I'm spending money on models or spending my time on things, I want to make sure that they're getting what they're paying for in that sense. But I'm not opposed to the idea of maybe in between scenes for Shadows of the Empire going into some of these more short type things. I probably won't take on another big project, something like Bounty Hunter Wars or an X-Wing thing or True Setback Corral, whatever it might be, things that I can jump into more easily after finishing Shadows. Probably won't jump into something like that while I'm working on Shadows, but maybe if it's a short story or a single issue kind of comic like Boba Fett Wreckage, which is a complete self-contained story in one issue, and it's a short issue too. Most comic book issues are 32 pages or 28 pages. Wreckage is only 22 pages, so and that one would definitely be a little bit easier to accomplish. But in the future, after I have some more Shadows of the Empire stuff actually out, I definitely would be not opposed to going back and returning to that project and maybe even adding a few others in there. Even stuff like tying into Shadows of the Empire to a certain degree, like stuff from the Tales of the Bounty Hunters short story collection. I recently went through and reread several of those when I was looking for dialogue for Zuckuss and for IG-88.
Yeah.
I do have voice actors for both of those characters, and I'm really happy with what I've been hearing so far. You got to hear IG-88 in the trailer. I actually had one person ask me, I think they DM'd me on Twitter, but they asked me if the voice for IG-88, if that was what I pulled from the game or if that was the actual voice actor. And that was actually a voice actor who did that.
Wow.
He's actually not just a voice actor either. He's a really good sound effects guy. So he actually did all the sound effects for the IG-88 voice too. Nice. I didn't touch any of that stuff. I tried to make something because I had a previous IG-88 actor, but I could not make it sound the way I wanted to. And then out of the blue, this guy just sends me stuff that already sounds great. And I'm like, I've got to go with what sounds best. Yeah. But he's actually been very helpful in making a lot of sound effects and stuff too for the animatic for Battle of the Bounty Hunters, between IG-88 and Boba Fett over Tatooine. I lost my train of thought. Oh yeah. Tales of the Bounty Hunters. But like whether it's, Therefore I Am, which
great story.
Yeah, a lot of that that would be a cool kind of thing to do, kind of in connection with Shadows of the Empire, or whether it's a Barv like that, or of Many Futures, which is the Zuckuss and Forlom one.
Yeah.
Because, once I already have those models made, and a lot of those types of things, like Therefore I Am, for instance, has very few locations that are outside of their ship or a Republic ship. And a lot of that stuff wouldn't be nearly as difficult to make as some other things would be. So
Yeah.
I'm not opposed to that. I'm going to leave it up to the patrons. But as I have ideas and kind of be like, hey, I might want to do this, I might want to do this, I'll put polls up like that, and I'll do it on YouTube too, just because I am, I also want to take into consideration what everyone on YouTube who follows the channel, what their thoughts are. But at the end of the day, patrons have the final say. But I do want to get everyone's kind of input there. But yeah. Boba Fett Wreckage. I know you've talked about that a good deal, and I know you were excited to see that. I'm sorry that I haven't finished it yet. But I definitely want to finish that at some point. It's a really cool little story. I already have all the voice acting done for it, so I don't have to really worry about that. I would have to do a lot more work on the interior of the wrecked Star Destroyer, and even a little bit on Slave One, because I'm working on that right now for Shadows. But another thing I'd say, another reason why I kind of deviated from that as well, literally the moment I posted I'm doing a Shadows of the Empire fan film, I got like twice as many views as I had on any of my other
the
Boba
brand
Fett
recognition
stuff.
is more there.
So not only just brand recognition, but like people are just more interested in it in general. And so I definitely want to put more priority there, even if it takes more time and a lot more energy from me to get that completed. But
well, I'm very, very excited about the Shadows of the Empire project. It's been very, very enlightening to hear all of this from kind of behind the curtain, how it's all coming together. I think I said this to you when we met a couple days ago, but with some of the fan films that crop up on YouTube, like announcements and stuff like that, you think it's like really cool idea, but I don't know if it's gonna go anywhere, etc. Like this, everything that you're doing sounds really planned out. It sounds like there's been a lot of rallying for it behind the scenes, a lot of magnanimous people sharing their assets with you for the project. It just sounds like it's really coming together well, and thank you for all the thought that you've put into it, because it seems like it's really coming together, and definitely prioritizing Shadows over Wreckage seems like the way to go. Very excited to see Shadows and for anything else that's coming down the pipeline as well. Very exciting stuff. Another topic that we had discussed, sort of a pivot for now, but we might come back to the animation that we talked about discussing, is you shared a video about supernatural encounters, and in the video you have a extremely sizable, beautiful collection of expanded universe books behind you. Talking a bit about collecting. What's the collecting aspect like for the expanded universe? Because it sort of gets to us, and it hurts our pocketbooks, but it makes a trip into an antique store more lively. A scouring eBay. It definitely gets to us, and it's very fun. So, what's the collecting been like for you in regards to the Star Wars EU?
Yeah, it's been a little while since I've bought a lot of new stuff, just because of how full my collection already is. Seems like there's less and less to buy. The most recent thing I bought actually was Star Wars 77, the comic issue 108, which actually was it's. Correct me if I'm wrong, because you probably know a lot more about this stuff than I do. It's the only officially released and distributed expanded universe material post 2014.
Yeah.
They released it in a pretty nice trade paperback called Forever Crimson.
Yep, with a couple of the original issues in there.
Yeah, it has a few of the other original issues that kind of tie into it. That's probably the most recent thing that I bought. I got it at a Half Price Books.
Nice.
They had like 3 of them on the shelf, and I was like, "What?" Like, but yeah, I definitely prefer hardcovers. I have everything in hardcover outside of the UK convention exclusive hardcovers, which let me just kind of look here. That's The Last Jedi. There's the 4 Clone Wars books, 1 by Karen Traviss and 3 by Karen Miller, that were post 2008 Clone Wars kind of tie-in books. But those 4 all have hardcovers that only exist in like, less than 500 copies that were only
super expensive now too.
you can't find them for less than $500 if they sell secondhand, if you can find them selling secondhand. So I tried to convince my wife to let me buy one once, and she was like, no, you're not spending that much on a book that whenever you already have the paperback, you don't need that text. And then there's also Scourge is another one that's like that.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think here, Shadow Games, and that might be it. Yeah, I think that's it for the ones that exist in quantities of less than 500. And, when they sell, which is very uncommon, they sell for over $500 most of the time. So I don't have any of those in hardcover, unfortunately. And the only other book I actually am missing, I have it digitally. I don't have it physically. This is the one thing I'm missing physically. And that's the Dark Forces Jedi Knight Dark Horse book. I have the first two, what is it? Soldier for the Empire and
Rebel Agent.
Rebel Agent. Yeah, I have those two, but I'm missing the third one. I have it digitally. I've read it digitally. I like it, but I've not been able to find it physically.
It's expensive
for a price. It's crazy too, because you can get like Soldier for the Empire and Rebel Agent for like less than $15 on any used bookstore, right? Whether it's half price books or even like thrift books, eBay, whatever, you can get it for less than $15 pretty easily. But Jedi Knight is always either over 100, and most oftentimes it's over 200.
Yeah.
And that's and even then, sometimes you're not getting it in the best condition. And,
no.
There's a few times where I bought stuff where I'm like, okay, it's not in the best condition, but I'm going to get what I can get. Like I have the original 1978 hardcover of Splinter of the Mind's Eye. I've never opened it to read it. I've read the paperback. But there's some water damage inside, and the dust jacket, is kind of on the edges, on the outside, isn't the best. There's no tears on it, thankfully. That's a blessing. But there's a few kind of rare items like that where I've just taken what I can get. But I'm like, if I'm going to spend more than $100 on something, or even more than $50 on just a single book, I don't think I want to get something that's in less than great condition.
Yeah.
One thing I did get, this is something I was very baffled by. It's one of the TCW tie-in graphic novel comics. What's it called? It's got Pre Vizsla on the cover of it.
That one's very expensive, isn't it?
He's got the Darksaber in his hand. I can't remember the name of it.
If something knows, about a temple, I think, right? Defender.
The Hidden Temple, or the Defenders of the Hidden Temple, or something like that. That's a different one. That has Ahsoka on the cover.
Yeah.
I'm going to look it up real fast. But that one I got at half price books for $4.
Wow.
And it was just on the shelf. It wasn't like I ordered it online or anything like that. It was $4. And immediately I knew what it was because I looked it up and I was like, I would like to buy this. And I couldn't find it selling for anywhere for less than $200. And I was like, for just like a, 50-page graphic novel, why that much? But the reason why is because it was only in print for 3 months before Disney bought Star Wars and stopped printing it. And so that is like the only one. The Smuggler's Code is another one that's semi-expensive that I actually got for a pretty good deal at Thrift Books. But here's the funny thing. I got it for a good deal at Thrift Books. It was only I think $30 or $35, something like that, when it normally retails for upwards of $50. But the copy they sent me looked like it had been chewed up by a dog. And so I was like, I would like a refund on this. And they said, okay, we'll refund it, but no, don't worry about returning it. And then a couple of weeks later, I was not expecting this. I got a new copy in the mail that was in great condition. So I actually have a chewed up copy of Smuggler's Code that I would be willing to sell if anyone is interested. You can reach me on Discord or email or whatever, because I've not sold that one just yet. But they sent me a great copy of it, and I was like, okay, I'll take it, like a full refund and a fresh
and
copy.
A better copy. Yeah. Absolutely.
But
plus a chewed up one for good measure as well.
And then, like I kind of mentioned earlier, when it comes to comics, I only have bought omnibuses for things that only have comics that can't be found outside of an omnibus,
like in a overseas UK stuff that would be in Wild Space, just odds and ends.
Yeah, or like the Galoob and Ertl comics I mentioned earlier, or the Devil's World comics, or certain things like that. Even like Shadow Stalker, that's another one that actually ties into Shadows of the Empire. It's got
Yep.
Jix. It's his only
Yep.
other appearance outside of Shadows of the Empire.
Indeed.
Is Shadow Stalker, but that one's in the early Victories Dark Horse Omnibus. I've tried to avoid any of the Marvel ones, mainly just because I like the Dark Horse logo. That's just purely a collector's preference. When I see the Dark Horse logo and Star Wars right next to it, brings me back to reading KOTOR and Legacy as a child,
Nice.
Open Seasons, that kind of stuff. So, and that and all the Marvel ones have that ugly yellow Legends banner on it that I'm just not a fan of that banner. I think I only have like one or two things that have that on it that I've not been able to find copies of in good condition without it. But yeah, I definitely do not like the Legends rebranding. I'm going to always call it the Expanded Universe. I might add, if anyone sees Legends in my titles or descriptions, just know that's only because it shows up in search results. I'm not a hypocrite. I don't call it Legends. I remember there was one guy who told me that it was in a comment on one of my videos where I said Expanded Universe the entire time, and then he said in the comments, "Don't call it Legends." And I was like, I didn't. I just put it in the title because I knew that people would be searching it. But anyways, I kind of view that like, imagine if someone bought Star Wars from Disney today and they rebranded the entire Disney canon as Myths. Imagine how many Disney canon fans would be like, "It's not a myth, it's the canon to me."
Yeah, like, and we'd be going first time. We'd be saying we went through this as well. This is what it feels like.
Be the what is it? The Ballad of Buster Scruggs meme.
With
James Franco. Yeah.
Yep.
But I still cannot find the name of that Pre-Vizsla comic. I'm looking it up here.
I think I found it here. If it's the same one.
You know what? You were right. It's Defenders of the Lost Temple. That's the one. Yeah, I know you said it was something with Temple.
Yeah, that's super expensive one there.
Yeah,
super expensive.
And I got it for $3.99 plus tax.
Very nice.
I was so surprised to see that there for that price. Whoever listed that, there's been a few times where I've seen things like that where I'm like, whoever listed it at this price does not know its value. Like I remember I've gotten some of the science fiction book club editions for like way less than they're worth. Trying to remember which one it was. I think it was one of the Young Jedi Knights collections I got for like $20. And the first one's a little bit easier to find because there's a lot more in print.
The third is really difficult, if I recall correctly.
I think that's the one I got for $20, and it rarely retails for less than like $75. On the secondhand market. And I actually have, believe it or not, the first one that I got on Thrift Books, they sent it to me, but it didn't have a dust jacket, even though it didn't make that thing. And again, Thrift Books did the same thing. They refunded the money, but they didn't make me return it. I think they've stopped doing that because people like me bought so much EU stuff from them. And then when there'd be issues, whether it be a tear on the dust jacket, missing dust jacket, whatever, chewed up smuggler's code copy, their policy at the time was to refund it and to not require you to mail it back in. But they sent me something else once that was like missing a dust jacket, and I went to return it, and I went to get a refund, and they were like, "No, that's not our policy anymore. You have to actually mail it back in, and you have to pay the shipping to mail it back to us just to get the refund." I'm like, "All right, I spent $8 on this book. The shipping's going to be like almost that much, if not, in and around, give or take a few dollars." So, so I actually do have quite a few books that are missing dust jackets that that people could contact me about if they're missing. I have the first 6 Young Jedi Knights book in a single omnibus that's up for sale, and a few other things like that. I have a few Fate of the Jedi ones missing dust jackets. I've replaced them all with nice ones with dust jackets since then. But but yeah, Thrift Books, for whatever reason, they did not, at least at the time, this was a few years ago, have a great like quality check system for some of that stuff. Like usually they list like, "Oh, this is missing its dust jacket," or they have a quality meter. It's poor, best, all that kind of stuff. But Sometimes you'll buy something best quality and it has no stipulations, and then you get something that isn't that.
Yeah.
The first, actually, I believe I actually have 2 copies of Splinter of the Mind's Eye in hardcover, but the first one they sent me was an X-Library copy, and I didn't want all those library stickers on there, and you cannot get X-Library markings off of something without absolutely destroying it. So
absolutely.
That's another thing too. If anyone doesn't mind having X-Library hardcover of Splinter of the Mind's Eye, I have one. I'm happy to sell as well, but where was I going with all this? Oh yeah, collecting. So and then with video games, I have a lot of video games on a physical copy as well. A lot of Nintendo stuff. That's kind of what I had growing up, was like GameCube, Wii, DS, Game Boy. So I've got a lot of that stuff. And I have a few things on Switch as well. Like I have the Jedi Academy and Jedi Outcast on Switch. And I think I have something else Star Wars on Switch too, but I can't remember. But I have a lot on Steam as well. I remember this was actually like just after The Rise of Skywalker came out. Steam was doing this mega Star Wars sale where you could get, I think it was something like 40 Star Wars games for $100.
Yeah. I saw that. Yeah. And crazy.
I just bought the whole bundle because I was like, hey, why not?
Yeah.
And so I think the only ones I didn't buy were a couple of the Lego Star Wars ones that were on there at the time. But anyways, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to come and talk about all of this stuff. We'll have to have you on the channel again sometime to talk about more of that stuff. Thank you so much for the hard work you're doing on Shadows of the Empire. All of these hours you're putting in, just 10 hours on Slave One. You know, it's very valuable.
And that's a very rudimentary version too. It'll look a lot better than that in the final version, I promise.
Yeah, thank you for sinking all of these hours into this project. Genuinely, from all of us, it's keeping it alive. It's giving us something to be excited for while we don't have really anything else. So thank you so much for, first of all, your work on the project. Thank you for telling us all of this behind the scenes stuff. Very fascinating, very interesting to learn a bit about the goings on that go into this project. And thanks for sharing your story for how you got into the EU and your collecting triumphs. Always wonderful to hear about stuff like that. So thanks so much for coming on to talk about the Star Wars EU today. And I just wish you for everything to go well for the project as it continues. Hopefully everything's just going to continue to align for you, and it's going to go great.
Thanks, I appreciate it. And thank you for reacting to the Shadows of the Empire trailer. I think you were the first one to do it. And then like 3 or 4 days later, I saw it on Star Wars Theory. So I was like, okay, like that's cool. I actually haven't seen any other reactions. If anyone has seen other reactions, I'd love to see them. I've gone and searched every now and then, but I've not found any other reactions other than those 2. Someone sent me actually that Star Wars Theory had reacted to it. I didn't actually see it because it was kind of a random thing on their live stream. It wasn't like they were, planning on doing
it just
that
popped
stuff.
up.
Someone just, whoever it was, I forget who it was. I shouted you out in my comments on my community post, but they paid $5 just to ask Star Wars Theory and Mahler and Ryan Kennel, who reacted to the trailer. They paid him $5 and said, "Hey, could you react to the Star Wars fan animations Shadows of the Empire trailer?" And then they talked about Shadows of the Empire and stuff like that. And
it was really cool.
Yeah, that was pretty nice. And but yeah, whenever you reacted to it, I was like, yes, people are actually watching it. I was really worried that a lot of people were not going to watch the trailer because I was like, it seems like something people would be really interested in, but if I put this trailer out and it's just an absolute flop, I'm going to feel pretty disappointed because of how much work I put into the project. And that trailer specifically, I probably put more work into that than I have any other specific scene so far, but definitely wanted to bring a lot more attention to it, and definitely gotten a lot of new people invested in the project as a result, both mentally and financially as well, people. And for anyone who's wanting to help support the project and bring it out faster, I have a Patreon, I have a Ko-Fi, whatever works best for you. I'm fine with either side. And you're free to message me on both. Like if there's things that you want, like I know I've seen on some Patreons for fan film creators, they have like wall art backgrounds for their laptops or their phones or whatever. If there's anything that you think like is of value to you, message me and ask me about it, because I'll create what it's worth for you. And whenever you invest in these projects, where that money is going, it's going into buying 3D models, paying for software subscriptions, and commissioning artists to work on this team. I'm not just loading up my bank account on Patreon. You know, I'm investing a lot of this into the project, and so I'm very appreciative for anyone who does do that. And if anyone watching on your channel, Brennan, who is willing to do that, like, thank you so much. Like, every investment helps speed up this process and enhance the quality. And for most viewers, those are the two most important things. How good of a quality is it, and how fast can you get it to me? And you know, even though I'm pouring my blood, sweat, and tears into this, just, you know, completely for free, if you invest into the project, I'm able to do things faster and make it look better and sound better. And in the end, that's my goal. Like, I've told this to you, Brennan, before, but you know, quality is like my biggest priority. Like, you know, there's been people who've reached out to me about voice acting, and they're like, here's my microphone, how does it sound? And I'm like, you know, I would love to have you as a voice actor, but, you know, the microphone quality is just not going to be there. And so, you know, I do kind of have, you know, somewhat of a high bar there in terms of quality, whether it's 3D models. I've had people send me 3D models, and I'm like, I'm not going to use this without heavy modification. And at that point, it's practically a new model. Because, you know, I definitely really want to put quality above everything here. And, you know, I'm appreciative for anyone who, you know, donates to the project, whether it's voice acting or 3D model work, sound work, composing. There's a couple people who've reached out to me about music, working on it as well. So I'm very appreciative for all of those people, and same for the voice actors and all that. But putting some money into the project definitely will help get it out faster, make it better. And I'm very appreciative to anyone who does that. And, you know, just want you all to know that your money's going to the project. It's not going to me. I'm not trying to rip people off. I'm not trying to, you know, do anything like that. And as far as, you know, monetization goes, I think Disney's policy for stuff like fan films, like, they've shut down crowdfunding campaigns for fan films and stuff like that. Some people have tried to monetize their fan films in certain ways that, like, you know, Disney has come in and struck down. Like, this is not the first Shadows of the Empire fan film that people have tried to make. Like, I didn't know that until a lot of people reached out to me, and even a few people who said that they asked about being interested in working on some of those other projects, and they'd either been turned away or the project collapsed before anything really came of it. Some of those things, you know, did have Disney's involvement, but I want to be 110% above board on this. If you're donating on Patreon or Ko-Fi, you're donating to the channel. You're not, you know, you're not specifically crowdfunding this project. That's where I'm going to put some of that money. But I'm trying to think, where was I going with that train of thought? Oh yeah, Disney. But I don't want Disney to come in and strike down the project. And one of the things too with Disney and their kind of licensing with this sort of fan created stuff is, like, one, if I try to monetize it in any way, like if I'm selling Blu-rays or digital files or anything like that, you know, they can definitely come after me for that, and I would not prefer that to happen. And another thing too,
definitely not.
A lot of video game stuff, Disney has been a lot more uptight about. Like, there's been several people who tried to remaster Shadows of the Empire, or, you know, everyone knows the KOTOR situation, where a incredible team of people were working on a KOTOR fan-made, essentially like remake of the game, but it wasn't like a remake so much as it was a remaster, right? But, you know, Disney has shut those projects down like every single time they popped up, unless they're from an official game development company who's approached Disney about it, like with the Dark Forces remake that's coming out later this year. But any fan-made stuff, you know, that isn't from an official game dev company, they've shut it down entirely. Fan films, they've been a lot more permissible about, as long as they're financed in an ethical way, and they're not being, you know, propped up as these big money makers. And so, you know, there's other content on the channel too that, like, you know, and stuff specifically for patrons as well. Like, something I've been working on this for a little while, but definitely has taken a long time to work on, especially because I don't own a 3D printer. I know a few people who do, but it's taken a long time to kind of get to those people and talk to them and try to work things out. But trying to get a Dejarik set where you can 3D print the models and have a board and actually play Dejarik with your friends and family, right? That's so something cool. You know, it's not a fan film, it's not a fan game. Well, it kind of is a fan game, but, like, it's just 3D models, right? And getting those available to people. And, one of the cool things too is like Disney has almost never gone after 3D models that have been posted online and sold online unless people rip them from games and just directly put them online for sale, right? There's been a few times where Disney has shut people down for that, but by and large, you can buy and sell and trade 3D models and stuff like that. But in terms of the actual fan film, like, if you're investing in the channel, I'm going to invest that money, into making Star Wars content.
Yeah.
And, but definitely kind of adding a degree of separation there helps a lot. And yeah.
Well, thank you so much for your time. Thanks to everyone for watching. Thank you for your hard work. Once again, I know I've thanked you several times already, but genuinely from the bottom of my heart, you're doing great work for us. And thank you for taking the time for the interview. And thank you to everyone who's watched this, for watching through all these Talking Star Wars EU videos, and this one too, of course. Thank you for watching. Make sure to go support Star Wars Fan Animations if you have the means, and raise awareness about his project. Send it to your friends, all of that good stuff. And we'll see you next time.